This week on Writers, Inc.
Like many people, I had that one book that I wanted to write. And it took me 10 years because there were times when I didn't work on it at all. And so I really didn't finish it until after I had retired. And then after that was done, I found I had a second and a third, and hopefully many more.
J.K. Rowling was nearly homeless when she wrote the first Harry Potter book. Stephen King penned Carrie in a small desk wedged between a washer and dryer. James Patterson worked in advertising and famously crafted the Toys R Us theme song long before becoming an author. Join New York Times bestseller J.D. Barker and a panel of industry powerhouses as they pull back the curtain on some of the world's most prolific authors. Where did they start? What is their process? The biggest names in publishing all have origin stories, all have tips and secrets. What does it take to consistently top the bestseller lists and become a household name? Get your notepad out. School's in session. This is Writers, Inc.
Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
Patrick O'Donnell.
JP Rindfleisch.
Kevin Tumlinson.
And I'm JD Barker. Welcome to Writers, Inc. So Christine just sent me an article that just kind of scared me half to death reading it. Now I'm just going to read the headline. It says, Amazon adds AI-generated review summaries so you don't have to read the comments. Yeah, like I
Talk
can see
about frying pan to fire, man.
Yeah, I mean, just to get like the first thing that my mind went to, like we're going on vacation really quick. I had to buy some sunglasses and because I am crazy lazy. I jumped on Amazon last night and I found any kind of pair of sunglasses that they could get to me in a day. And one of the things that I noticed is like in the description right at the top of a lot of them, it said frequent return item. Please review description carefully, like in red letters. You know, basically tell me a lot of people review this particular thing, so make sure I know what I'm ordering before I buy it. Like I didn't even bother to go on. You know, like after seeing that. With like each pair of sunglasses, I went off to something else because that one sentence basically told me a lot of people didn't like this. They sent it back and I don't want any part of it. So what is this going to do for book reviews? You know, if they're writing a summary based on, you know, let's say a new author, you know, who's got 10, 15 reviews out there. Like I remember when Forsaken first came out, like maybe the third or fourth review I got was like a 3-star and it wasn't very flattering. And like, and it stayed up there at the top for, you know, a while, you know, because there was nobody reviewing this book. You know, so if you don't have the reviews flying in, like I could see something like this, like really hurting people.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
I think when it comes to like a product with a small amount of reviews, me as a user, I can just look through those reviews. Like, I don't really care what the AI has to say. But if I'm seeing like a product that has hundreds of reviews and I'm only seeing the 5-star and the 1-star, because that's really all that you get to see is like kind of the highlighted. It's like, what's the best? What's the worst? Getting that kind of quick overview summary might be useful. It might tell me something that I might have missed otherwise. By something that might be like high accolades that could be, for all I know, their friend writing the review, to low accolades about it just being a trash book that may not be true at all.
But is that what this is going to do? Is provide like a AI generated summary of the
that's
reviews?
What it's gonna do.
I could see that getting gamed real fast.
Oh,
if that's the case.
Yeah, from what I read,
it will screw things over.
Yeah, from what I read, it's AI generated. And my mind went to, you know, with the reviews, they have those like little clouds with just like 1 or 2 words. I believe that's AI generated, but I'm not 100% sure. So this is just expounding on those, I think.
Well, I think it's going to be a combination of everything you just touched on. So JP mentioned that, you know, right now they show, I forget what they call it, but they show you a low star review and a high star review, but basically both up front, like most critical review or something like that. So you get that wide range. Then you've got the cloud that Patrick just touched on. So I'm guessing this is going to take the data that's in the cloud and just turn it into, you know, a couple sentences, a paragraph or whatever, and just try to turn it into one concise statement. Yeah, that probably could get gamed. I'm you know, a couple of the wrong keywords showing up and, you know, all of a sudden it creates the trend for this particular title, you know, product.
Also, all the things that I knew would be outsourced eventually. I didn't think like my critics would be outsourced to AI, you know, like next it'll be the readers. Like, don't bother reading this book. Here's this AI summary of the whole book. Thanks to Amazon. That's where it's going.
That's what I'm going to work on next. I'm going to create an AI that can actually buy the book for people. Just randomly just start buying the book, drop it in their Kindle. You know, AI generated, book of the day, book of the hour, something like that. Just have it automatically
off Amazon at all.
No, I'll get consent. Get people to sign off on it. Yeah, anyway, we'll see where this goes. But yeah, this is kind of one of those things. I guess it could be really good for some people. It could be really bad for other ones. We'll see. JP, what's in the news?
Well, the hashtag BookTok helped book sales soar, but how long will that last? So adult fiction remains the leading category in book sales with an 8.5% increase in 2022 and 4.2% in the first half of 2023, largely due to the influence of BookTok. BookScan's analysis indicates that BookTok's impact on book sales is waning. In July, sales monitored from BookTok noted that authors dropped by 4.5%, marking the first decrease compared to the previous year. So we've talked a lot about BookTok in previous episodes and how that seems to be very influential at the time. And I think we might be starting to see that wane away as potential new platforms start to rise again.
Well, I think you got to look at the wording of this very carefully. So they're saying they're tracking BookTok authors. So they basically created a list of the authors that did well based on BookTok hashtags over the last year or so. I think probably what's really happening, interest in TikTok is increasing. They're getting more and more users all the time. Probably, over the other platforms. I don't see anybody else making that claim or being able to demonstrate that right now. But I think the market itself is getting saturated. So where they may have had, let's say, 100 BookTok authors they were following, that did well last year. Now all of a sudden there's 1,000 or there's 10,000 they're all competing for those same people. So I think the readers are out there. I think they're still discovering books that way. I think just the selection pool that they're seeing has probably gotten a little bit bigger.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of predicted that. I know this is naysayer talk, but I predicted that eventually this would start leveling out. But I also know that the people who are running TikTok, they're looking into going deep into publishing. And so, starting their own publishing division and doing things. So this may be softening, but I think we may see it spike again once they start investing actual dollars into it. Right now, it's users, it's the influencers, and they're the ones driving all of this. But what happens when the company behind all this and the money behind all this starts pouring all that energy into, convincing people to buy books from their authors on their platforms, et cetera. So I think we'll see another spike. But I think ultimately people just get burned out on this stuff. And I think it's just not going to last forever. If I could find something that I thought was going to last forever, I'd throw my books and money into it all the time. But I haven't found that yet.
Next up is AI. AI created art. So AI created art is not copyrightable, judge says, in ruling that could give Hollywood studios pause. So amid the writer's strike, a judge determined that AI generated art cannot be copyrighted. So this is interesting, to say the least. I think it really puts a note in for studios that were looking to use AI, because if they can't copyright those works, then what are they going to do?
But
so
there's a caveat. I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's
I need
always
to let
a
you
caveat.
actually finish what you're saying.
No. I mean, there's always a caveat. So why don't you jump in? Go ahead.
Well, the AI art itself you can't copyright. But if you create something from pieces of this stuff, you create an overall product, that thing is copyrightable. This is where I think things are going to get weird, because the same sort of rules are applying to AI writing as well, right? And they're saying you can't copyright the stuff that was written by AI. But what does that mean for a book? If you wrote part of the book using AI, if you wrote the copy on the back of the book, what does that mean? So this is another Band-Aid approach to this that can't last, can't hold up. But I use elements. I create elements, and just like I used to buy stock photos, I create images that I can manipulate and create original art, and then it's got my stuff over it. You can't find that artwork anywhere else. So if you use that artwork, it means you lifted it directly off my cover. I think I would have a strong case for going after somebody for stealing my IP. But It's Wild West days.
This is a weird one. So an image is obviously a very static thing. It's a one-off. So they're saying you cannot copyright this one building block, this one piece. So what happens if you have a movie that, take a Marvel movie, how much of that movie is AI generated or, at this point generated by computers? It's literally the same thing. You're just putting a different tag on it.
Yeah.
At some point, somebody's going to have to make a judgment call and say, well, 60% of this movie was created completely in a computer. Now you can't copyright 60% of this movie. Now, what does that mean to the studio? Can they still release the movie? Do they still own the movie? And the same thing translates to books, just like Kevin just touched on. If you're copy and pasting, if you're working with ChatGPT and it's handing you a paragraph and you write the next 5 and you get a sentence from ChatGPT, then you write the next paragraph by yourself. You mix and matching. How much of that book are you going to be able to copyright? If you look at the actual Library of Congress, the law itself right now, you can copyright the human generated portions of that book. So you can, which is near impossible to do because you would have to isolate every one of those instances. Right. I can tell you from ITW standpoint, we've got a clause in our various agreements that say for a book to be entered into any of the contests or to be used in any way for membership, things like that, it has to be 100% copyrighted by the owner of the book. So, if 80% of the book is human, 20% is AI, you can't pull 100% copyright on that, meaning that you can't use it in order to gain membership or in one of the contests. That's how ITW is handling it. And we lifted that language from another organization that I'm not going to name at this point. But I'm seeing a trend in that direction too. Until the Library of Congress comes out there with some type of benchmark, draws a line in the sand, I think everybody's just going to be guessing at it. But I can't see a studio betting, $200 million movie on something like this. They're going to try and find some way to, get the lawyers involved and make sure they can actually own the final content and copyright the final content.
I'm very curious though where the line is going to be because they already use computer generated stuff and AI has been a part of that. I mean, all the way back to the early 2000s. The Lord of the Rings films used AI to generate. They called it Massive, was the name of the program, and it generated all those crowd war scenes where you saw millions of orcs or whatever fighting each other. That was all AI generated. So where's the line? Where's that line fall?
That's the thing. If you're familiar with the software, I mean, the rendering process is basically a big chunk of this too. They create the scenes in the computer, they create the framework, and back in the old days, like I remember reading, I think it was one of the Shrek movies. They would basically create that framework, then they would let the computers run overnight to actually fill in the blanks and draw the images themselves, and it would be ready to go in the morning when they came back in. That's AI generated content. It wasn't called that back in the day. It was called rendering. But just putting a different label on it isn't going to help anybody.
Yeah.
I think the message here is just tread carefully with AI right now because nobody knows.
Mm-hmm. I think the message is don't tell anybody what you do. Just keep your secrets. Don't tell anybody I used AI to do this or that. Just shut up and
just keep your
copyright
secrets.
Your work.
Last in the news is not AI. This was an Open Market Institute's letter to the FCC. So they have some concerns and would like an antitrust probe into Amazon, alleging its monopolistic stance as both a seller and buyer in the book industry, with tactics such as predatory pricing and strong arm negotiations. So this was actually something that JD sent the rest of us later last week.
Yeah, it's funny because I read this and it reminded me of back in the day when Microsoft got sued for Internet Explorer. They wanted to strip that out of there because none of the other browser companies stood a chance of making a living. Netscape couldn't survive. This company couldn't survive. They lost, I believe, a part of that. That they had to pay a fine, and it was some insane amount of money that they paid every single day until they rectified the problem. Ultimately, it made no difference in the end. Unfortunately, when a company gets this big, they're stepping on a lot of feet, and those feet are, right now they're kicking back. They're trying to find some way to level the playing field. But Amazon came out of nowhere. They were basically a little startup company they've just made a lot of really, really good decisions, and it's put them on top of the world, literally. I can't fault them for that. I don't see Amazon stripping out their book publishing division. I don't see them, any more than, like, I think I mentioned in the email, like that's like asking them to say they can't sell diapers anymore. They can't sell this anymore. The only way that's going to happen is if the Amazon board of directors gets together and says, you know what, I think it makes financial sense for us to go ahead and take the publishing division and turn it into this company, take this division and turn it into this company, and break the company up. The company itself is going to have to decide. That the government, just at this point, they don't have enough of a case, I think, to make that sort of thing happen. And if it does happen, imagine what that means for authors. If KDP gets spun off into its own separate company, all of a sudden that company is going to have to generate income to survive. Right now they're not charging authors to post a book on KDP. They're going to have to, if that's what it comes down to. The Amazon
or take
imprints,
a much bigger cut of royalty,
Right?
or that, or something.
The fund would go away for sure. That global fund would disappear overnight if they had to break KDP out, and so it would become much more like every other competitor in that space, where they're getting a large chunk of that author's royalty on every sale. Amazon has been kind of subsidizing that. They've treated books as a loss leader from the very beginning, so it's all about getting subscribers. I'm sorry, JD, I completely stepped on.
Go ahead.
It's always been about getting subscribers. It's always been about getting people to get into that, like not just the Kindle Unlimited, but Amazon Prime, anything they can offer that's going to convince people to give that a shot. And so books have always operated as the loss leader. They've always, right to the point where they were practically just giving books away and still paying authors so that they could keep that core group of readers engaged. And the global fund has been about that. They're taking money from different silos of that business and offering. It's down again. It's down to like 0.0004 cent, or 3.8 actually, not even 4, like 3.8 cent of a cent. And so it's down lower than it ever has been, which I think is a bad sign for everybody. But I think ultimately, though, the problem here is that just because you're on top doesn't mean you're a monopoly. And they do have competitors. That's the primary rule for being a monopoly, is whether or not you own the marketplace so tight that no one can even compete with you. The competitors have been accused of monopolistic practices themselves for as long as I've been alive. I mean, Walmart, all the way back to the point where I first learned what a Walmart was, they've always been accused of being monopolistic, running people out of business. You can't call them a monopoly just because they're on top. There are surely things happening at Amazon that are bad for everybody. And I think we need to figure out, how we approach that. But I don't think this approach is it. This doesn't feel right.
It's not going to go anywhere. That's that. I mean, as long as there's a Walmart and a Target, there can, Amazon is allowed to exist. Yeah. As long as there's a Random House and, Simon and Schuster and these other publishers out there, Amazon can exist as a publisher.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think you can argue they're a monopoly. Like you said, they're more like a retailer. But the interesting part that I thought in this letter was when they were talking about how they manipulate sales, because they control reviews on sites that seem independent, like Goodreads, and they control the printing, and they control used book sales. Do you think that's going to matter in this antitrust investigation at all?
Well, the thing is, they can kill it, right? If Goodreads becomes a problem, then they can kill Goodreads, and then we as authors lose another tool that doesn't help any of us. But that's what Amazon will do. They'll cut the the cancerous limb off before they'll hang up their shingle and become,
because they lose nothing by doing that. There's no cost to them to do that. It's not like they're making money on Goodreads. I think there's ad revenue, but there's no like subscriptions. There's no product to sell. They link to the books on Amazon, so it's sort of a marketing tool. But how many people? I mean, I know there's millions and millions of users on Goodreads, but I can't remember the last time I ever heard someone tell me, I found your book because I was on Goodreads.
Yeah.
So I don't even pay attention to it anymore.
Fair enough.
No, but I mean, there are readers out there, and there is discoverability happening, and it is a loss leader. Like, I'm sure if you were to take Goodreads aside and look at their financials, they're losing money. Amazon is supporting Goodreads. They're keeping, Amazon sales, AWS is probably paying for Goodreads on at some level. The fact that it is one company, they're able to do that. They can run portions of their business at a loss and basically incubate them and turn them into something, or just keep them alive, just because it's a benefit to society, by leaning on the portions of the business that are profitable. But when you have to start breaking it up, those other pieces start to go away. I don't see the upside. The only people who would actually have an upside if this happened would be the traditional publishers. And unfortunately, like, this isn't the right move. Like, if they want to right their own ship, if they want to fix their business, they need to look at their own business and figure out what's not working. I just had a new book that we took out, and we talked to all the major publishers, and the marketing plans that I saw were the identical PowerPoints that I saw 4 or 5 years ago on other titles. They literally just did a find and replace on them. You can't survive in the business world if you don't evolve, and you certainly can't just shoot your competitors because they're in your way. You need to outsmart them.
This episode is brought to you by AutoCrit. One of the most value-packed memberships for any author, AutoCrit brings you an amazing suite of tools that make it a breeze to plan, write, and edit your books all in one place. AutoCrit takes you far above standard grammar checking or cookie cutter guidance. Instead, it's like having an experienced editor in your genre watching over your shoulder to help you deliver great writing that keeps your audience trapped in the story. You can even compare your writing style to more than 100 best-selling authors right down to the word level, so you can see what the best in the business do to keep their storytelling clean, clear, and crisp. Listeners of the Writers Inc. podcast can now take advantage of lifetime membership for one single fee. That's right, no renewal fees.
Hi, this is JD Barker. I've used AutoCrit for years, and not only has it improved my writing, but it's been a crucial tool with aspiring authors that I've mentored. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just beginning, it'll help you find your weak spots and weed them out. Give it a shot with your latest project. Trust me, your editor will thank you.
Head to autocrit.com/JD to get your lifetime membership. Big thanks to AutoCrit for sponsoring the show.
All right. And on that note, JD, who's up this week?
This week, we've got Marsha DeFilippo. She's, after 33 years as Stephen King's assistant, she's embarked on a writing career of her own, basically proving it's never too late to chase your dreams. Her latest novel is called Follow the Crumbs, and it's out now. So here she is, Marsha DeFilippo.
So we are talking about your latest book, Follow the Crumbs, where 4 friends with special abilities start a quilting club and end up becoming amateur sleuths. Do you want to share a little bit more about the book?
I started writing it because I enjoy reading cozy mysteries, and I enjoy quilting. And so the two just seemed to form a natural fit for each other. I have written 3 romance books. They're later in life romance. There we go.
Nice.
But this is my first foray into cozy mystery writing. Much different animal.
Excellent. So I kind of want to start back a little bit earlier. So you were Stephen King's personal assistant for 3 decades. Yes. I'm curious, what sort of things were part of your job on a daily basis?
Lots of things. I was a liaison with the publishers, with agents. I took care of scheduling. When he started a website, I was the one in charge of that. We had a message board, and so working with fans, answering their questions, that sort of thing took up a lot of my time. And when it came to book tours, that sort of thing, I would help coordinate those.
Nice. And I think, did you get started typing up manuscripts as well? Was that something that you did?
It was the first thing I did for him. Actually, before I started working for him, I was, I'm probably dating myself here, but it was Kelly Girl, which was a temp agency. And it was one of my assignments to go to type Eyes of the Dragon, which was perfect for me. It comes as a surprise to many people that I do not gravitate to horror. So typing a book that was really a little more fantasy was a perfect introduction. That was the first thing I'd ever read by Stephen. So a good way to start out, get my feet wet.
Awesome. And so did you want to be a writer before you started this job, or did that kind of happen during the job?
It happened much, much later. I can't say that that was ever my aspiration in life, but like many people, I had that one book that I wanted to write. And it took me 10 years because there were times when I didn't work on it at all. And so I really didn't finish it until after I had retired. And then after that was done, I found I had a second and a third, and hopefully many more.
So you retired a few years ago, and you'd been writing this book on and off for about 10 years, and then just finally had the time to do it?
That's right. I believe it was September 2021 that I self-published. And so in the meantime, I have put out the 2 more books in that first series. Book 1 and the Cozy Mystery series just came out, and I'm on pre-order for book 2.
Nice. That's excellent. And if it's okay to ask, and if it's not, that's fine too. During the job, did you learn anything about writing? Any tips that you could share with us?
Oh, absolutely. If anyone has read Stephen's book on writing, they know how much he hates adverbs. And I can say I use AutoCrit as one of my self-editing programs, and I am far below average in my use of adverbs. So I did definitely learn that. I have found that I have a new appreciation for traditional publishing and what they do for writers like Stephen. It's a much different process with self-publishing.
Yeah. I was just going to ask, what made you decide to go the self-publishing route?
A couple of things. I think imposter syndrome hit in, and I convinced myself that no traditional publisher was going to buy my book. And I think a lot of that had to do with how much I saw through the years how other writers struggle to get that first break, to get into it. And then in speaking with several other writer friends that I know who have followed the self-publishing plan, that just struck a chord with me that this was something that I could do. And of course, in the early days when I first started working for Stephen, someone who said that they were self-published was just, okay, that's a vanity press.
Yeah.
But I guess it's been in the last 10 years that self-publishing has really come into its own. And it gives writers so much more control and power over their own careers.
Yeah, we're really lucky to be in a time where we can use the same tools as a self-published author, for the most part, that traditional presses use as well. And imposter syndrome, that's something we all struggle with. Was that a barrier for you to kind of push through and publish that first book? And how did you deal with that?
Oh, it's still a barrier at times. I don't know if it was hubris or impetus with reading some other writers who I'm sure many writers have gone through this, saying, I could write as good as that is, and they're published. So I think that sort of convinced me that, okay, you can try this. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but at least try it.
I love that. And when I do have that experience, I think we all do. I'm like, oh, I could maybe do a bit better than this. And I just tell myself that means there's room in the market for my book. So I love that. That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
And you chose Cozy Mysteries for this book. Why do you think food is so important in Cozy Mysteries? Why does it show up so much?
Well, I don't know. It's I think right up there with romance books too. It's a nice, easy read. It's fun. Those times when you don't have to really think a lot, which I don't mean to be putting down the genre, either one of them, but sometimes that's all you need.
Yeah, you need some fun entertainment. And you have a lot of food in your cozies. Do you like to cook or do you like to entertain? There's a lot of that in this book.
The first one did for sure. And I do like to cook at times, but I wouldn't call myself a gourmet cook or anything like that. But actually, that evolved with a suggestion from one of my other writer friends. And she enjoys reading it and said, well, okay, I'll try it.
Yeah.
The second and third books, I have not gone that direction as much.
Not as much food. I did like it. I was like, oh, it's very cozy. Follow the crumbs. Lots of cozies are named after food. I think that's so charming. And you are a quilter as well. Are you a pretty serious quilter?
I have been, although since I've started the writing, I don't have as much time for it. It's one of those things that before I retired, I said, that's what I will be doing. I'll have all the time in the world to be able to pursue those hobbies. And I'm finding that the writing has become almost as much of a job as it was before. My boss doesn't pay me as well for this job as my prior one did, but hopefully that will change sometime.
Yeah, the writing does tend to take over. I want to talk about the voice in your book. I really loved the voice of the cat, Reuben, in your novel. It's so distinct and so snarky. How did you get that voice right?
Oh, I don't know. I I hear the conversations in my head. I knew I wanted the cat to be snarky because that's just the way cats are. I'm more of a cat person than a dog person. I love their independence. And so I wanted that to come through.
Yeah. Do you have a cat? Are you
Not at the moment.
not at the moment? You've had previous cats.
Exactly. With traveling between Maine and Arizona is just not something I can do right now to try to have a pet to take back and forth.
So if you did have a cat or in a past cat, would you actually want them to talk to you?
That'd be kind of fun, I think.
I was thinking about it. I'm like, oh my goodness, my cat would just be like, can I have treats? Can I have treats? Can I have treats? I'm like, I don't know if I want to know what she's saying. She tells me enough without the words. So I'm curious. So you did go on the self-publishing route. What was harder about self-publishing than you thought it would be, or what was easier?
Marketing and promotion. It's not something that comes naturally to me. In talking with other writer friends, that seems to be a commonality. They love writing, hate the marketing.
Yeah, that's always the hard part, is letting readers know your book is out there. Was that anything you'd ever had experience with before in your previous job, or no?
Not really, because as I say, this is one of the differences between traditional and the self-publishing that makes it harder. I don't know if actually I have a skewed perception of that, though, because working for Stephen was, I'm sure, a much different thing than it would be for some other writers, even though they're traditionally published.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Stephen is his own genre. Mid-list authors, maybe they don't get so much marketing behind them, right?
That's what I've heard.
So what have you learned about marketing? Is there anything that you can share about your journey, or?
Oh, it's a very steep learning curve. I think I am maybe a quarter of the way up on the curve. And things change so often. You think, oh, I've got this down pat, and then something changes. Amazon changes their rules. Facebook changes their rules. And you have to completely change your strategies.
Yeah, that's true. So you're out there, you're marketing, continuing to write books. I'm curious, what's the best piece of craft advice from anyone that you've ever received?
I think it's to keep going, to keep practicing, keep learning. I guess that isn't one single thing, but it all comes out to the same. I belong to a writers group called the Wiley Writers, and we meet Monday through Friday, 2 sessions a day for 2 hours for each session. And it's not a critique group. It's more for accountability. And I have to say that more than anything, that's what's kept me going. In those times when I thought, I just can't do this anymore, I'm going to give up, they talked me off the ledge. And just having that encouragement from fellow writers is so important. So I think for anyone who's trying to do it alone, to maybe seek out other writers, writing groups, and just connect with them, because that sharing is really important. So often with a writer, you can feel like you're all alone in it, because it is a solitary career. So that would be my advice, I think.
That's fantastic. And I love that. And we talk about that a lot, the importance of community and not struggling by yourself. That's an intensive in-person group. That sounds fantastic. Yeah. How about up until this point, what's the best money you've ever spent as a writer?
Well, I'm spending a lot of money right at the moment. I think the best money I ever spent so far would be taking Sarah Cannon's Publish and Thrive course. It really is an in-depth, nuts and bolts course about the writing process, both writing and the publishing piece of it, marketing advice, so many tips that I wouldn't have learned perhaps as quickly as I was able to by taking her course.
Yeah, that's great advice. Everyone should take a course if they don't know, because there's so much to learn. It's not laid out straightforward. It's not, getting it organic over years, over trial and error is so frustrating. So that's a great
Absolutely.
tip.
Yeah.
So I'm curious a little bit about your process. So when you write, when you're finished a first draft, do you end up editing, and what do you end up editing out of your books?
I found that I used the word "that" far too much. And so after I have finished the first draft, I run it through the AutoCrit program, make corrections based on that. And actually, I'm a writer who has to add words more than take them out. So it's almost as though that first draft is an outline draft that then I have to work with more.
So you end up putting kind of some meat on your skeletons. Is that the way it goes?
That's a great way of putting it. Yes, exactly. Add more description.
Yeah. What other type of things do you add to your work? I'd love to hear about what you end up adding in as a...
I have to be very careful about the show, not tell. So that's one thing I'm still working on, still learning. So I do have to go back and fix those things. I tend to be heavy on dialogue. And so I do have to go back to, again, put in more description and add narrative. Perhaps I should have been a screenwriter since so much dialogue.
There's still time. That'll be next, I guess. So when you're writing, do you hide secrets or Easter eggs in your books? I couldn't help noticing some of your characters' name, like Jim Davis and lasagna. And I'm like, is this a Garfield reference?
Oh, I hadn't even thought about that. So no.
No, it was just a happy accident.
It
Stephen
was.
Hill, was that an Easter egg or no?
No.
No, I was like, are we combining a former boss and their son? No.
Not consciously.
Not
Let me put it
consciously.
that way. It may have been there in the back of my mind, and I just didn't realize. Now, in the second Cozy Mystery book that will be coming out at the end of September, I have introduced a character from my romance books.
Oh.
So for those readers who have read those, they'll recognize the name.
How lovely.
Should be more of a supporting character. But that's one thing from working with Stephen that so many fans appreciated those Easter eggs, and they felt like it was, an inside joke kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah, I'm one of those fans. I love it when a character I've read shows up somewhere else. That's delightful. What's on your reading list right now? What are you currently reading and enjoying?
I've been reading a lot of how-to writing books, trying to read more of the cozy mysteries in the hobbies and crafts and quilting. There's a writer, Catherine Michael is her pen name, and I've enjoyed her books. Kathy Daly is another writer who I enjoy. She's not so much crafts and hobbies, but I think I started writing her because at least one of her series was set in Maine. So it was familiar, and I think a lot of readers enjoy that when they can identify with something that's in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice. Great recommendations. Okay. And as we're wrapping up, I just have one final question. If you could offer a piece of advice to writers who are just starting out, what would it be?
Practice, practice, practice. Even if you think it's trash when you're writing, maybe put it aside. Sometimes you come back to it and say, oh, I can't believe I wrote that. So don't be too hard on yourself and just keep going with it. If that's what you truly love and want to do, keep doing it.
Okay. Well, I have to admit that I'm kind of envious of Marsha's job. I'm just curious, if you had worked as an assistant for a well-known writer, what's something you would have wanted to learn?
I'm probably the worst guy to ask because, I'm writing with James Patterson. Like I literally just hung up with the guy 10 minutes ago.
What have you learned?
And I was talking, I was talking business with him. The thing is, whenever I get in front of any of these types of people, anybody who's doing something better than me, and it doesn't have to just be writing, it could be real estate, it could be fixing a car, it could be mowing your lawn. If I find somebody who's better at it than I am, I try to find out why they're better at it. I pick it apart, figure out if there's any way I can incorporate that bit of knowledge into my own knowledge base, and use it to better myself. So yeah, 33 years of working with Stephen King, I'm sure I would have gleaned, some pretty decent information out of something like that, and it would help, shape my own writing career.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. The things she has to have seen, and if she had the ambition to be a writer, I would have been paying attention every day of that, just in asking questions. King would have fired me in the first 3 months, actually, because I'd have been asking questions. It's funny. It's so ironic that this episode came out because I literally just started listening to On Writing again after writing. I wrote a blog post about it a week or so ago, and so that now I'm listening to him literally reading his own book about all this stuff. She was there through all that.
Well, she reminded me of back when I worked in the corporate world. I worked with a lot of executive assistants, and they all have a certain personality about them where they are just cool, calm, and collected no matter what is going on around them. And it's literally because they are able to juggle 100 different balls all at the same time without letting anybody else know what they're doing, and just basically just holding it all together. And Marsha definitely gives off that vibe. You can just kind of tell. I'm sure she's seen a lot of stuff. I can just imagine, the amount of work involved in doing that particular job, dealing with all the publishers, all the marketing people, all the press. Think of the fans, everybody just trying to reach him through her, things like that. I was honestly surprised. Like, I love hearing origin stories, and her mentioning that she was a Kelly girl. Like, first of all, I totally forgot that term. So this was a temp service that was around years and years ago. But she was brought in to retype Eyes of the Dragon. And I went back and looked because I couldn't remember what year this was, but that came out in 1984. So obviously before computers, so they would have a printed copy of the manuscript, literally typed up on a typewriter. King or whoever, would go through, they would make notes, make edits, and then somebody like her would have to come in and retype those 400, 500, 600, and King's case 1,000 pages, and basically create a fresh draft. And it's funny because I've mentioned this before. I've got Needful Things sitting off to the side, which came out in 1991, and he was still on a typewriter back then. So it's typed pages, it's got notes in all the margins and things like that. Or the next step would have been Marsha or somebody like Marsha picking it up and having to retype it. But here she starts off as a temp and basically ends up in this particular career. Like, she probably had no idea that's where it was going to go when she picked up the phone that day.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious, have you ever retyped another author's manuscript? Because I know that's something that I have heard people do to get the feel for it, to get them working on things. I can't remember what authors it is, but I know that they've said they've typed manuscripts.
That's something that I've actually taught when I'm mentoring people. I would have them take a manuscript and type like the first, in some cases, the first half of the book, just to get a voice down and get the dialogue down and that type of thing. And then I would tell them to close the cover on the book and write the second half on their own, without knowing how the story ends. It's a great way to basically just capture the entire thing, because writing isn't just about telling a story. It's also the cadence. It's the way the words look on the page, punctuation, grammar. If you go through that type of exercise, it's a ton of work, but it will drill those things into your head. You're going to know where your comma goes. You're going to know whether it goes before or after quotation.
Yeah, I remember reading that's how Benjamin Franklin taught himself to write, actually, was by, and he did it a little different. I mean, what he would do is read something, and then he would try to reproduce it from memory, and then he'd compare it to the original. And if it didn't match up, he'd start over until he just had the rhythm of it so pat that he could read something and replicate it. I've never really tried doing that. I mean, the closest I ever came was writing short stories in the universes of the authors that I really loved. But yeah, I think it's an interesting approach. Maybe we should do it now. I should just do that now.
So, but you said you were listening to On Writing, Kevin. So what's your take on adverbs?
Yeah. I've never agreed with King on adverbs, but that's fine. He sells a lot more books than I do. So look, you should probably go with his advice over mine. But I think adverbs have their place. I know you want to avoid the Swifties and all that. I mean, he's right about that. But I think sometimes, though, it's just part of the fun of the language and that's what attracts the reader. Like, I got to have fun writing what I'm writing. And sometimes that means using adverbs, because it's like, jumping in the ball pit, at McDonald's or something. It's just, it's nasty. You're coming out with some sort of virus, but you just got to do it because that's where all the fun is.
He's got a hypodermic sticking out of his butt. That's way to go, Kevin.
That's a great comparing Stephen King to the ball pit at McDonald's is an amazing analogy, and the kind of thing that you can only do if you're willing to use adverbs.
I think it's the kind of analogy that comes out of somebody that uses a lot of adverbs. I mean, I think they've got their place in a first draft. I don't think there's anything wrong with using them. But when you go back through that draft, you can usually take an adverb and you can turn it into something a little bit more colorful, a little bit more descriptive that brings the reader more into the story, just as easily as you can get rid of the he said, she said stuff and tie that into the book a little bit more. I love the fact that she mentioned she uses autocrit. Like, this is not something I would have expected coming from her.
Yeah. Not just because they sponsor us.
Yeah.
It's no always good when we can tie it back to the sponsor.
Right.
That's autocrit.
Yeah, I would love to hear a little bit more of the comparisons. Like she's obviously had a lot of experience working King's books and seeing the marketing that goes behind a machine like that, and then having to come out as an author, with their own title, as an indie published title, where you're basically doing all the heavy lifting on your own. I would have loved to see a little bit more comparison between the marketing that she's basically used to after 30 some years versus what she had to do on her own, because obviously it's two very, very different worlds. I think even from Christine had mentioned a mid-list author, like if you're at one of the big publishers, you're not seeing King marketing. Nobody's seeing King marketing except for King.
I
wonder how much of that she was really exposed to, though, because I don't know if she's necessarily seeing like the marketing plans and all that stuff. I don't even know if King necessarily sees all that. He can tell us if he does, I guess. But to me, he's operating at a level where he writes a book and hands it over, and they take care of the details. That's the way. That's my interpretation. Maybe I'm wrong. Am I wrong, JD? You'd know more than I would.
I don't think you're wrong.
Here's the thing. I kind of think you're due. You are, and only because he has got a very good business mindset too. I don't think he would let the machine run on autopilot to that level. I think he wants to know exactly what's going on with every level of the book.
I can accept that.
And because he is, I think those things crossed her desk. But the fact that she is, a very solid executive assistant, she would never talk about it. But I think she's probably seen it. I think she probably heard the rants and raves from King's side when he saw something he didn't like, and vice versa. I think she probably saw it from all different angles.
Yeah,
I think her biggest takeaway though from King was how hard he worked. Just the ethic, the work ethic of sitting in the chair every day and pounding out the words. There's no magic pill. There's no magic anything. The guy's he works hard, and that's a common theme with all of the authors that we interview, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. It's like they all have one thing in common: they work their asses off.
Yeah.
No, nobody will hand you anything in this world.
No. I do think it was a surprise for Marsha, as it is for anyone who indie publishes, how much time and effort you have to put into the marketing, and you're doing it on your own.
Yes.
She was struggling to publish initially because of imposter syndrome, so decided to go indie. What about you guys? Do you deal with that? Is that something you struggle with, the imposter syndrome demon, or have you beat it?
Yeah, totally. Every time I sit down, there's that. Well, every time a book goes out, there's that moment where I wonder, if anyone's going to find me out. There's also that moment like someone will ask. I went to an eye doctor appointment this morning, and the eye doctor asked me like, so what book of yours should I start with? And I couldn't answer because I'm like, I don't want to tell her these books because I know there's some people have complained about this little flaw or whatever, So I totally. And these are books, by the way, that did well, that made money, that some of them got awards, but you still, imposter syndrome doesn't really discriminate, man. That's all there is to it. It comes at you. I understand the plight of the author who feels like they can't do the job. You can totally do it. I believe in you. If you are struggling with this, feel free to reach out to me. Go to my website, email me. I will talk you through it. But just know I deal with it too. JD, of course, doesn't. Well, he's like, I got this nailed.
I think we all do. And honestly, I think that's, it fuels you. I think it's part of it. It helps drive you. Just at least for me, like just knowing that, like she had mentioned, some of her writing, she put it aside for a while and then she went back to it. I think that's really important too, because like right now I'm working on another book in the 4MK series, which I've talked about before. I'm listening to the audiobooks, which I've never done before, in order to get back into the story, and I'm basically making notes for myself and things like that. And these are books that I wrote years ago, so I'm hearing them for the first time as audio, and hearing the story, from a very different angle, just because it is an audiobook, and like it's it's a pretty decent story. Like I'm actually like into the storytelling itself, and like it doesn't feel like something I wrote anymore because I'm so far enough removed from it where it feels like just another audiobook. I think, and I've done that, the flip side has happened too. I've had plenty of writing that I put aside and I've gone back to and said, oh, now I understand why I put this aside. This part's crap. But then I was able to look at it objectively and fix it. And I think that's important too. But imposter syndrome, I mean, I know a lot of the bigger names, everybody's got it. I think when it goes away is basically when it's probably time to hang up the typewriter.
Yeah. I think how I cope with imposter syndrome is like several facets. It's the idea that whatever you've put out is a reflection of the best of your abilities at that time, and just reminding yourself that like that is just a snapshot and you have grown, and that you're always growing and you're always learning. Knowing that, I feel less impostery, or at least I'm able to lie to myself, because I know that that's just a representation of what I was back then, and that way I can recommend it to people but not feel awkward about it, because I'm just like, that was me 3 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever.
The first time I felt that way was my first book signing. You're just sitting there going, oh, okay, they're kind of here to see me. That's kind of weird. It's a very odd feeling. At least they were there. Yeah,
my first book signing, nobody was there to see me at all. So
I was lucky. I didn't have to pay anybody to show up. Really, it was really cool. But being interviewed on a podcast, speaking at a conference, and all that, you have that little twinge of who am I? But then you get over it and you just do it.
Oddly enough, I've never felt imposter syndrome over podcasting.
I had at a conference. I showed up and I was like, I've done this conference for a couple of years. I don't know why. They asked me to come and talk about stuff. And I like told them my name and they're like, I know who you are. I'm like, nobody knows who I am. Like, how do you know who I am? But it was just like the weirdest feeling. But yeah, I usually have it probably on a weekly basis on the same project where it's like, I'm the world's worst writer and I'm going to kill this with fire. And then the next day I feel fine. So I don't know. I'm like, oh, this is fine. It's good. But yeah, Marsha talked about having her community to help as a cheerleader, which is helpful. So who cheerleads you when you're feeling like an imposter?
My daughter is very fond of telling me that I know what I'm doing. She likes to pick up my books and tell me to get in front of my computer and make another one, things like that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I don't know that I mean, I was doing this, we talked about this before too. I was doing this, long time ago, long before people started paying me for it. I enjoy it. I don't really need a cheerleader. I don't need people to tell me it's good. I don't need people to tell me it's bad. It's therapeutic for me. I like doing it, so I'm going to keep doing it.
I think my Substack audience is my cheering crowd now. But yeah, unfortunately, my wife has read some of my stuff, but she complains that she can't keep up. So she wants to read things that she's interested in, so she's not my cheering crowd on that note per se, but she does support me and she knows that I'm good at this. But it's really interesting because I go to a lot of author conferences. I do a lot of events, speak and that sort of thing. And I meet people all the time who come to me and say, I've read your stuff. I love it. I want to write the way you write. And so that's very heartening. But yeah, I don't have like a consistent group. I just don't. Maybe I need to start like a little community.
Yeah. Speaking of community, that's what I ended up doing is I created I found, I guess, a smaller community of people that, I WhatsApp message a lot of them daily. One of them, including Christine, just because like we have the same ambition and the same goals. And that really just becomes this like miasma of cheerleading, I guess. I don't necessarily need feedback on work in order to push me forward, but to just know that there are other people on the same level or above or below that are moving in the same direction.
Yeah, for sure.
I think for me, having a complete stranger say something nice about your writing or your book, that's a huge shot in the arm. It's not your mom, it's not your wife, whoever, but a complete stranger that'll take the time to actually like reach out to you in an email or even a review or whatever and say something decent, that's very impactful, I believe. And just to share a real quick story with you guys, a good friend of mine had cancer for about 3 years, and he recently passed away. And he was like one of the biggest bar guys in the city of Milwaukee. He was known for craft beers. They called him the godfather of craft beer and all this other stuff. And he was very, very police friendly. His dad was a cop in Milwaukee for years. And what happened with him was his last stages of chemo, he told me he had to sit in this chair for like 6 or 7 hours. And he said he bought one of my books. And he says, I love your book. And as soon as I heard that, I went over to the bar and I gave him all my books in that series. And they had his funeral and like memorial at his bar. And his brother was bartending, and he pulled me off to the side. I never met him before. He says, you're that writer guy, right? And I'm like, yeah. And he says, oh, Mike loved those books. He says, now I'm going to read them. And I'm just like, oh, that's all I needed. That was just like, wow. I almost started crying. It was very touching.
Patrick, I didn't know you had it in you to tell a heartwarming story without mainly horrifying elements in it. So good job.
I was waiting for him to tell me that he like pulled his gun on the guy.
Okay, there's no decapitations. There was nobody jumping off a bridge. There was no...
So I went to the suicide scene, and amidst all the brains and gore was one of my books with a note written inside. It said, I loved this. I would have stayed had I known there were more.
Oh,
see, I'm multifaceted, Christine. People cast me, and they, it's like I have a lot of different angles to me, Christine.
I didn't even hear the story. You lost me when you said you gave away books. I tuned out after that.
Oh, wow.
Ever the capitalist.
Wow. Brr, it just got
On
cold
that
in
note.
here.
on that heartwarming note, JD, who's up next week?
Next week, we've got Nicholas Fillmore. He's the author of Smuggler, an award-winning memoir that chronicles his experience with an international heroin smuggling ring. His latest title is called The Gospel of Satan, which released earlier this year. That should be a lot of fun. Nicholas Fillmore.
Sounds fantastic. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.